Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Houston Sports Talk back another video day. And today I'm going to be going over my Houston Texans 53-man roster predictions. As I go over my 53-man roster predictions before and after the Houston Texans games, preseason games, we will see the Houston Texans 53-man initial roster announced on September 1st after the Texans play their third and final preseason game and get ready for their September 8th matchup against the Indianapolis Colts, which will be a great game. Week 1, so excited for it. But we got a couple preseason games left at NRG, which will be great to see the Texans play at home after 2 games in Ohio against the Bears, playing in the Hall of Fame game in Canton, Ohio, and then this past week playing in Pittsburgh against the Steelers. So it's gonna be great to see the Texans play at home again. We haven't seen them at home since the wild card win when the Texans beat the Browns, and it's been a total of 3 games for the Texans now where they haven't been at NRG, and the 3 games goes all the way to the month of January. But you can go all the way to the divisional round playoff. Loss against the Ravens. The Texans have not played at NRG in Houston. Now, I said Astros because I've been talking so much about the Astros. If you're not an Astros fan, the Astros have been killing it. So I've been doing a bunch of Astros content recently. I've been lying down a little bit low with the Texans, so that's why I wanted to do this. But a little bit more focus on the Astros and Rockets recently. Ever since the Texans played their game on Friday. But I've been trying to do Texans 53-man roster prediction videos before and after each Texans preseason game. So since the Texans, have played their second preseason game and are going into their third preseason game on Saturday, this is the before, third preseason game. I'll do one after the Texans preseason game on Saturday. The Texans play on Saturday against the New York Giants, so I'll probably plan to do another 53-man roster prediction video either Saturday night or early Sunday. Either one, we'll see. But this is the before, preseason game 3 53-man roster predictions. And the reason I like to do before and after is because I like to see where I had the 53-man roster before gameplay, because if anybody goes out there and has a great performance, like if you look at last week, Brandon Hill absolutely killed it. He had 4 or 5 tackles, he had an interception, he had a fumble recovery on the punt that was a punt fumble. He recovered that. He was fantastic. He's a guy last week I would have not had on the 53-man roster. A little bit of a spoiler. I don't have him on the 53-man roster right now. But if he goes out there and has another good game like that on Saturday against the Giants, he's the guy that could make a jump. The reason I like to do this is because there are guys who, if you have a really good game, there are changes. There are changes from this 53-man roster from the last time I did this. From the last time I did a prediction video. So the reason I like to do before and after is because we see this change all the time with what's going on in practice, what's going on in these preseason games. So that's why it's so fun to do before and after. But let's get into the 53-man roster predictions. I'm going to start off with the players I have getting cut, and then I will go over the full 53-man roster. I'm going to go by position, though, with the roster cuts. So these are the predictions for the 37 players I have getting cut. Let's start off with quarterback. The only quarterback I've getting cut from this roster is Tim Boyle. Now, running backs and fullbacks, I think this is very hard, but I think the obvious, Troy Harrison, British Brooks, J.J. Taylor, some solid names right there, but they're not making the roster. Don't see the Texans, starting off with Troy Harrison, don't see the Texans keeping 2 fullbacks on the roster. British Brooks, he's a solid undrafted free agent. He could get signed to the practice squad if he does some good things in these last 2 preseason games. We'll see what he does. I think he will get maybe more of a chance, but I don't think so. J.J. Taylor, I think, is more of a guy who has a better chance to make the practice squad. And then the final guy is Jawar Jordan. Someone in the running back room has to go. It's going to be tough, and it sucks to release a 6th-round pick. But if you look at the running back room, And it's pretty obvious who I have making the roster. If I go over the roster cuts in the running back room, 4 running backs probably make the roster. Last year we saw 5 fullbacks and running backs make the Houston Texans 53-man roster to start off the season. I don't see that changing. I think it'll be the same thing where we see 4 running backs and fullback Andrew Beck. And if 4 running backs are making this roster, of course, you're going to see Joe Mixon. I think Durang Gaballo is an important threat to this Texans team because he's a great guy to have. Number 1 being an emergency kicker. Number 2 being a good receiving running back who I think is a good guy that the Texans could bring in on maybe third. And I don't want to see the offense struggle to the point where they have these situations. But even a good team has situations where they have a long third down where they're not really trying to convert that third down. They're just trying to, get better field position for their punter by throwing to a running back. And the perfect guy in that situation, in my opinion, is Durang Gaballo. He's a guy who the Texans have loved to do in those situations last season, even the season before that. So he's a nice running back as well. He's a nice ball carrier, but I like him as a receiving back as well. And great on special teams as a returner, and also he's an emergency kicker as well for the Texans, so he does too much to cut him or put him on the practice squad. And then with Cam Akers, he's impressed me too much in preseason and training camp for him to get cut. With Dameon Pierce, I think he's valuable for this Texans team as him being a guy who is a kick and punt return guy and is elite in that category. And I think with the new kick return rules, I think he could be very important for this Texans team this year on that side of the ball and special teams. And even though he didn't look promising in his first preseason game, he has still shown a lot of good stuff. Going back to his rookie season, I still have hope that he could potentially do that. And I want to remind everybody, Joe Mixon is on a 1-year contract. If the Texans don't bring him back, who's going to be the running back for the Texans? I think Dameon Pierce, such a young running back, is a potential candidate to become the Texans starting running back again if Joe Mixon's a rental for the Texans. I think anybody saying Dameon Pierce should be traded or cut, I don't see that happening. But I want to get back to the roster cuts. So going into the wide receivers, I have getting cut. And for this certain guy, I think you could trade him also. I think most likely he could get cut, but I think most likely if he was going to go, he could get traded. But I think at the most it's going to be for like a 6th or 7th round pick, and that who I'm talking about is John Mechie. I don't want to see John Mechie go. It's tough to give up on a 2nd round pick who you had high hopes on, but we saw the Texans last year have 6 wide receivers in the wide receiver room. I don't see that going up this year. I don't see the Texans adding in a 7th wide receiver in the wide receiver room so John Mechie can make this roster. I don't think he has played that good in preseason or training camp for them to do that. I think training camp he's been okay, but in preseason he has not done anything at all. And I don't think he's been good enough for the Texans to, go over 6 wide receivers and have 7. Because if you go over 6 wide receivers and you have 7 wide receivers on the roster, that's taking a position from somebody else. I don't think you're going to take away from the defensive position. I think it's going to be 25 and 25 on this defense and offense. So what that means is you're going to see 25 offensive players make the roster and 25 defensive players make the roster. And if that's the case, then you also have three special teams players: your kicker, Van Buren, your punter, Tommy Townsend, and your long snapper, John Weeks. So I don't see them taken away from the defense. So I see that locked in at 25. I don't think they'll take a position player. I don't think they'll take a defensive player away and then it's 26 offensive players, then 24 defensive players when, your head coach is literally a defensive, head coach. So I don't see D'Amico taking away from the defense. So if we're going to look at offensive positions, I think this is too much of an injured offensive line to take a position away from the offensive line. The tight end position, are you really going to have only 2 tight ends on the roster for a 7th wide receiver instead of 3? Go to the running backs. There's already too much controversy right now at the running back position. Imagine taking another running back spot away. I guess you could take away a quarterback, whether it was Case Keenum or Davis Mills. But if you do that, then if you do that, then you only have 2 quarterbacks on the roster, and nowadays you see 3 quarterbacks make a roster ever since the rules have been changed, where 3 quarterbacks can be on the game day roster. So I see no way where we see 7 wide receivers make the roster for the Houston Texans. So one guy has to go. I believe that's John Mechie. Xavier Hutchinson has killed it in the preseason. I don't see him getting cut. Robert Woods, I think he's a candidate to potentially get released or traded because the Texans want to keep John Mechie. But I think about Robert Woods, and he's played so good in training camp and preseason. I think he's a valuable player to this team. And I honestly, with John Mechie's struggles, I think I'd rather have Robert Woods right now. So I have John Mechie getting cut. I also have the following other wide receivers not making the roster: Ben Skoranek, Steven Sims, Johnny Johnson, and Quintez Cephas. And I think a couple of those players have a good chance to make the practice squad. I think Ben Skoranek, Steven Sims, and Johnny Johnson are candidates to potentially make the practice squad. Then at the tight end positions, the 2 tight ends I have getting cut are Tegan Quintanario and Dalton Keene. I like Tegan. He's shown some good things, but he is too injury prone, and I don't see the Texans having 4 tight ends on the roster. Then on the offensive line, I had the following players get cut: Nick Broker, Kendrick Green, 249th overall pick Ladarius Henderson, Chris Reed, Charlie Heck, David Sharp, Jalen Thomas, and Killian Zaire. Defensive line, the following players I have getting cut: 247th overall pick Malik Fisher, Ali Gay, McTelvin Igim, Marcus Harris, Tim Settle, and also Philodarius Payne. And then with the linebackers, the following players I have getting cut: Tariq Barnes, Delshawn Phillips, Jacob Phillips, Max Tooley. Then the secondary: Mike Ford, Chris Boyd, Troy Pride Jr., D'Angelo Ross, Brandon Hill, Lonnie Johnson, MJ Stewart. With that being said, here is what the Texans' 53-man roster would look like. With the QBs, we would have C.J. Stroud, Davis Mills, Case Keenum. Running backs and fullbacks, you'd have Joe Mixon, Damian Pierce, Andrew Beck, Cam Akers, Durang Gabalaway. Wide receivers, you'd have Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, Nico Collins, Noah Brown, Robert Woods, and Xavier Hutchinson. Tight ends, you'd have Dalton Schultz, Brevin Jordan, and Kate Stolver. Offensive line, you'd have Laramie Tunsil, Kenyon Green, Juice Scruggs. Also, Shaq Mason, Titus Howard, Blake Fisher, Dieter Isian, and Jarrett Patterson. Then the defensive line, remember, guys like Danico Autry and Dylan Horton will not be on the 53-man roster as Danico Autry is suspended, and also Dylan Horton is on the NFI list. So defensive linemen: Will Anderson Jr., Daniil Hunter, Foley Fotokasi, Mario Edwards Jr., Derek Barnett, Kurt Heinisch, Solomon Byrd, who is another draft pick for the Texans, Jerry Hughes, and Khalil Davis. And then in the linebacker room, have Aziz Al-Shahir, Christian Harris, Henry To'oTo'o, Jake Hansen, Neville Hewitt, and Jamal Hill making the roster of the linebacker room. And then in the secondary, your cornerbacks: Derek Stingley Jr., Kamari Lassiter, C.J. Henderson, Jeff Okudah. Then the safeties: Jalen Petrie, Jimmy Ward, and Kalen Bullock, and also Eric Murray. And then the 2 nickels: Desmond King and Miles Bryant. And then special teams, I've already mentioned this. You would have Kaimi Fairbairn, Tommy Townsend, and John Weeks. So that is what I think the Texans' 53-man roster looks like as of right now before the Texans' week 2 game 3 preseason matchup. I know that sounds weird, but this is week 2 of the preseason, while the Texans will play their 3rd game because they had the extra Hall of Fame game. Let me know your thoughts on my Texans 53-man roster predictions in the comment section, and peace out.